The hardest part wasn't finding out my sister sold Dad's auto shop while he had dementia. The hardest part was realizing she had been planning it for months, while I was calling her every week asking, "How is he doing?" And she was saying, "He's okay, don't worry." She used my distance against me. She used his illness against him, and she almost got away with it. If a mechanic named Ray Kowalski hadn't decided that some lies are too ugly to stay buried. If this story is hitting close to home already, stay with me. Because what Ray saw that day changed absolutely everything. My name is Simone. I grew up in Denton, Texas, in a house that always smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee. My dad, Gerald, owned a small auto shop called Gerald's Garage on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a two-bay shop with a hand-painted sign and a loyal customer base he'd spent 31 years building one honest repair at a time. People trusted my dad. In a town where everyone knew everyone, that trust meant everything. I used to do my homework sitting on an overturned bucket in the corner of that shop while Dad worked. I'd watch his hands move under the hood of some stranger's car. Steady, sure, unhurried. He had this way of explaining what was wrong with an engine where he'd crouch down, look you in the eye, and talk to you like you were smart enough to understand. Nobody ever felt talked down to by Gerald. That was his gift. My older sister Vivienne never cared about the shop the way I did. She thought it was beneath her. The grease, the noise, the blue-collar simplicity of it all. Vivienne had ambitions. She married well, moved to a nicer part of Denton, joined the right social circles. Dad never said it out loud, but I could see it in his eyes sometimes. A quiet kind of hurt when Vivienne would wrinkle her nose at the shop or change the subject when customers stopped to chat with him in public. But when Dad got diagnosed with early-stage dementia at 68, Vivienne was suddenly everywhere. It started small, the way these things always do. Dad would forget where he put his keys. Then he'd forget appointments. Then one Sunday he called me and asked when Mom was coming home. Mom had been gone for 6 years. I sat on my kitchen floor in Nashville, where I'd been living for the past 4 years, and I cried until my chest hurt. I called Vivienne that same night. She answered on the second ring, voice smooth and controlled, like she'd already rehearsed what she was going to say. "I know, Simone. I've already talked to his doctor. I'm going to handle things here. You have your job, your life up there. I've got this." I should have felt relieved. Instead, something small and cold settled in my stomach. But I told myself I was being unfair. Vivienne was here. I wasn't. The least I could do was trust her. So I did. I kept calling every week. Every week she told me Dad was stable, comfortable, that the shop was running fine, that Ray was keeping everything together. "You know how Dad is. He still goes in some mornings just to sit and feel useful," she told me once. And I held on to that image like a lifeline. Dad in his chair by the window. The smell of oil and coffee. Ray underneath some old pickup truck, radio on low. I held on to that image for 8 months. Then I booked a flight home for Dad's 71st birthday, and the shop had a sold sign in the window. I remember standing on that cracked concrete sidewalk, staring at that sign like if I looked at it long enough it would rearrange itself into something that made sense. The hand-painted lettering of Gerald's Garage was still visible underneath a strip of white paper taped across the glass door. Someone had already started peeling away the old sign from the brick wall on the side. You could see the ghost of it, the outline where the paint had protected the brick for 30 years, now just a pale rectangle in the shape of everything my father had built. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I called Vivienne right there on the sidewalk. She picked up on the 4th ring. I could hear the clink of what sounded like a lunch gathering in the background. Voices, silverware, someone laughing at something. "Simone, are you in town already? I thought your flight was..." "Vivienne, what happened to the shop?" Not a question. I couldn't make it a question. My voice came out flat and cold in a way I didn't recognize. A pause. Just long enough to tell me everything. "Oh, I was going to talk to you about that in person. I thought it would be better face to face. Talk to me now." Another pause. Then her voice shifted into something rehearsed and gentle, like she was speaking to someone fragile. "Dad wanted this, Simone. He told me himself. Running the shop was becoming too much stress for him. His doctor agreed that simplifying his life would help slow the progression. Selling made sense. It was his decision." I stood there with the phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. The Texas heat was coming up off the sidewalk in waves. A truck rolled past on the street behind me. Normal Tuesday afternoon in Denton. World just kept moving. He signed papers, I said. While he has dementia. He signed legal documents. He was having a good day, Simone. He understood what he was signing. How much? What? How much did you sell it for? The pause this time was longer. That's that's really not the point right now. Vivienne, how much? 90,000. I almost dropped the phone. Gerald's garage sat on a corner lot on a road that had been steadily developing for 3 years. The building alone was worth double that. The business, the equipment, the customer base Ray had kept loyal through everything. Conservatively, that shop was worth $220,000, minimum. Everyone in Denton knew it. Someone had gotten it for 90,000. I drove straight to Dad's house, without saying another word to Vivienne. He was sitting in the living room in his recliner, the television on but muted, a cup of tea gone cold on the table beside him. He looked smaller than I remembered. His hands rested in his lap like they didn't quite belong to him anymore. He looked up when I walked in and his face did this thing, this slow, searching thing, and then something clicked and he smiled. Simone. Just my name. But the way he said it cracked something open in my chest. I sat on the footstool in front of him and took both his hands in mine. Dad, I said carefully, do you remember signing papers about the shop? He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes, still sharp sometimes, still him underneath all of it, drifted toward the window. Vivienne said to sign, he said quietly. So I signed. Vivienne said to sign, so I signed. Those 6 words sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't cough up. I squeezed Dad's hands and smiled at him, the kind of smile you manufacture when you're actively falling apart on the inside, and told him I was happy to be home. I made him fresh tea. I sat with him through dinner. I watched him fall asleep in his recliner with the television still muted and the evening light going gold and soft through the curtains. And then I went into the guest bedroom, closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall for a long time. I wasn't crying. I was past crying. I was in that cold, hollow place that comes after the first wave of shock, where your brain starts moving like a machine, slow and methodical, turning everything over, looking for the edges of something solid to hold on to. Vivienne had been planning this. That thought kept surfacing no matter how many times I tried to push it down. Because a sale like this doesn't happen in a week. You don't just wake up one morning, decide to sell a 31-year-old family business, find a buyer, draw up legal documents, get them signed and notarized, and transfer the deed, all while your sister is calling every single week and you're saying everything is fine, don't worry. This took months. She had been looking me in the eye, well, looking me in the voice, every Sunday evening, and lying. Smoothly, completely, without a single crack. I thought about every conversation. Every he had a good day today. Every Ray's keeping the shop running perfectly. Every you focus on your life up there. I've got things handled here. She had been building a wall around what she was doing, brick by brick, using my guilt about living in Nashville as the mortar. I opened my laptop and pulled up Texas property records, Gerald's garage. The sale had been filed 6 weeks ago. The buyer listed was a holding company, Aldous Vern Properties, LLC. I stared at that name. Aldous. I'd only met Vivienne's boyfriend twice, once at a family Christmas 3 years ago, once briefly at a cousin's wedding. Aldous Vern. Quiet man. Expensive watch. The kind of person who listens more than he talks in social settings, and you later realize it's because he was calculating, not shy. Vivienne's boyfriend had bought Dad's shop through a LLC for $90,000, a property worth more than twice that. I shut the laptop. My hands were completely steady now, in the way that hands get steady when rage replaces fear. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was crystallized. I thought about calling Vivienne that night and decided against it. She'd had months to build her story. I needed more than anger. I needed proof that meant something to someone with the power to act on it. The next morning, I drove back to the shop. I don't know exactly what I was looking for. Maybe I just needed to stand in front of it again in daylight and make myself accept that it was real. The sidewalk was empty. The garage bays were locked, metal doors pulled down. Someone had removed the strip of paper from the glass door. You could see Gerald's garage painted in faded red letters again, like the building itself was refusing to forget who it belonged to. I was standing there, arms crossed, sunglasses on, trying to hold myself together, when I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. I turned around. Ray Kowalski was walking toward me from the far end of the parking lot, hands in his jacket pockets, jaw set, eyes steady, like a man who had been waiting a long time to say something important and had finally decided today was the day. Ray Kowalski was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, with grease permanently embedded in the creases of his knuckles no matter how hard he scrubbed. He'd worked for my father since before I was born, started as a teenager sweeping floors, learned everything from Gerald, and never left. Dad used to say Ray was the only man alive he'd trust to rebuild an engine blindfolded. He stopped a few feet in front of me, took his hands out of his pockets, looked at me the way people look at you when they're carrying something heavy and have finally found the right person to set it down in front of. "I figured you'd come back here," he said. "I've been driving past every morning hoping I'd catch you." Something in his voice made my throat tighten. "Ray," I said, "tell me what happened." He looked at the shop for a moment, at the faded red letters on the glass, and then back at me. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "About 4 months ago," he started, "Vivienne started coming around more. At first I thought it was good, figured she was checking in on Gerald, making sure things were running okay. She'd bring him lunch sometimes, sit with him in the office." He paused, shifted his weight. "But she started asking questions that didn't sit right. About the equipment. What was it worth? Had anyone made offers on the property recently? What did I think the lot alone would go for?" I told her I didn't know, and I didn't think it was my place to say. She smiled and dropped it, but she kept coming back. I was very still. The morning sun was already hot on my shoulders. I didn't move. Then about 10 weeks ago, she came in with a man I didn't recognize. Suit, drove a black Audi. She introduced him as a financial consultant, said Gerald had asked her to bring someone in to look at the books. Ray's jaw tightened. Gerald was there that day, sitting in his chair in the corner of the office like he usually did in the mornings. He liked being there even when he wasn't fully with it, just liked the sounds, the radio, the familiar smell. Ray stopped, looked down at the gravel for a second. "That man wasn't a financial consultant, Simone. He was there with a folder full of papers. I saw them spread out on Gerald's desk. I heard Vivienne talking to your dad in this real soft, real gentle voice, telling him these were just some routine papers, that his doctor thought this would help him feel less stressed, that she'd already looked everything over and it was all fine." My stomach turned completely over. "Gerald looked confused," Ray continued, voice dropping lower. "He kept looking from Vivienne to the papers and back again. At one point he looked up and caught my eye through the office window. And Ray stopped. His voice went rough around the edges. "I should have walked in there. I know I should have. But she had the door closed, and I told myself maybe I was misreading it. Maybe it really was routine. Gerald trusted Vivienne. I didn't want to cause a scene and embarrass him." He looked at me directly. "That is the one thing I will regret for the rest of my life." "Ray," I said carefully, "did you see him sign?" He nodded. "Once. Slow." "She put the pen in his hand," he said quietly, "and she guided it." The world went very silent around me. Not peaceful silent, the kind of silent that falls right before something irreversible. Vivienne hadn't just manipulated Dad into signing. She had physically moved his hand across that paper. I drove home from that parking lot with Ray's words running on a loop inside my head. She put the pen in his hand, and she guided it. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and drove the speed limit and breathed through my nose the whole way because I knew if I let myself feel the full weight of what he'd just told me, I would pull over on the side of that road and completely fall apart. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. Back at Dad's house, I made us both lunch. Grilled cheese, tomato soup, his favorite since as long as I could remember. He ate slowly, watching a nature documentary with the sound low, occasionally pointing at the screen when an animal did something that pleased him. In those moments, he seemed so entirely himself, curious, gentle, quietly delighted by small things, that the reality of what had been done to him felt even more obscene. After he napped, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook and wrote down every single thing Ray had told me. Date, description of the man in the suit, the folder, the closed office door, Dad's confused expression, the pen being guided. I wrote it all down in plain language, exactly as Ray had said it, while it was still fresh and precise in my memory. Then I called my friend Deanna back in Nashville. Deanna had been a paralegal for 11 years before she went back to school and became an elder law attorney. We'd been friends since college. She was the kind of person who listened without interrupting and asked exactly the right question at exactly the right moment. I told her everything. From the sold sign to Ray's account to Aldous Vern Properties LLC to the $90,000 sale price on a property worth more than double. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the line. Simone, Deanna said, what was the official date of Gerald's dementia diagnosis? I pulled up the paperwork Dad's doctor had sent. 14 months ago, stage 2, early to moderate. And the sale was filed 6 weeks ago. Yes. Okay, I could hear her thinking. That particular focused quiet she got when something had clicked into place. Here's what matters legally. A person with a diagnosed cognitive impairment does not have the legal capacity to enter into a contract, especially one involving the sale of a major asset. If your father was in stage 2 dementia at the time of signing, that sale is potentially voidable. And if what your witness saw is accurate, that the signature was physically guided, that moves this from a capacity issue into outright fraud territory. My hand tightened around the pen I was holding. The fact that the buyer is her boyfriend operating through an LLC, Deanna continued, establishes a clear conflict of interest. She had a fiduciary responsibility to your father as his caregiver. She used that position to facilitate the transfer of his primary asset to her own partner at well below market value. A pause. Simone, this is elder financial abuse. This is a crime. I had known it. Somewhere in my bones since the moment I'd seen that sold sign, I had known it. But hearing Deanna say it out loud, in her careful, precise, legal voice, made it real in a way that my own rage hadn't been able to. What do? I said, not helplessly, practically. First, Deanna said, you get Ray Kowalski to put everything he saw in a written statement, dated and signed. Then you call Adult Protective Services. Then you call me back and we file. I looked out the kitchen window at Dad's backyard. The old pecan tree, the rusted lawn chairs, the garden Mom had planted that Dad still watered every spring out of pure habit and love. Okay, I said. Let's take her apart. Ray didn't hesitate for a single second when I called him that evening. Tell me where to sign, he said before I even finished explaining. I've been sick about this since the day it happened, been carrying it around like something rotten. I want it out. We met the next morning at a diner 2 blocks from the shop. Neutral ground, quiet corner booth, coffee neither of us touched. I had my notebook. Ray had his memory, which turned out to be extraordinary. He remembered the date. He remembered the color of the folder Vivian's associate had carried. He remembered that Dad had asked twice what he was signing, and both times Vivian had redirected him with a gentle pat on the arm and a soft, "It's okay, Daddy. I've read it all. It's just routine." He remembered the exact moment the pen was placed in Gerald's hand. He remembered that Dad's signature, a signature I had seen on birthday cards and permission slips my entire childhood, bold and looping and confident, had come out as a trembling, unrecognizable scratch. I wrote every word down. Then Deanna, joining us by phone, walked Ray through the formal written statement. He spoke and I transcribed, and when it was done, Ray read it back slowly, nodded, and signed his name at the bottom with a steadiness that made my eyes burn. Your daddy was a good man, Ray said, folding his hands around his coffee cup. Best man I ever worked for, treated me like a person from day one. When my wife got sick back in 2014, he told me take whatever time I need and kept paying me full wages for 6 weeks. He shook his head slowly. Nobody does that. Gerald did. I had to look out the window for a moment. I filed the Adult Protective Services report that same afternoon. Online, detailed, with Ray's statement attached as a document. The APS intake worker called me back within 2 hours, which told me they took the combination of dementia diagnosis, guided signature, and below-market sale to a related party very seriously. Then I called Deanna back, and we began building the legal challenge. The paper trail Deanna started pulling together over the next 72 hours was damning in a way that went beyond even what I'd already known. The notary who had witnessed Dad's signature, a woman named Patricia Gould, had notarized documents for Aldous Vern Properties LLC on 2 previous occasions. She wasn't a random notary. She was connected to Aldous, which meant the notarization itself was compromised. A witness who was anything but neutral had certified a signature from a man with documented cognitive impairment on a document transferring his primary asset to his daughter's boyfriend's company. Deanna said 3 words when she found that connection. This is beautiful. Not beautiful like something pleasant, beautiful like a case that builds itself. I had been at Dad's house for 4 days by this point. I hadn't told Vivian any of what I was doing. She had called twice, breezy, casual, suggesting we all have dinner together before I flew back to Nashville. I let both calls go to voicemail and texted back that I was spending time with Dad and would be in touch. I needed her comfortable. Comfortable people get careless. Careless people don't prepare. On the fifth evening, Vivian showed up at Dad's front door unannounced. She had a casserole dish in her hands and a warm smile on her face, and she looked so completely normal, so utterly composed, that for just a fraction of a second I understood how she had fooled everyone for so long. Then I opened the door wider and stepped aside to let her in. "We need to talk, Vivian," I said quietly. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes did. Just for a second, just enough. She set the casserole dish on the kitchen counter with the careful precision of someone who needed something to do with their hands. Dad was asleep in his recliner in the living room. I could hear the soft, rhythmic sound of his breathing from where we stood. Vivienne smoothed her jacket, turned around, and leaned against the counter with her arms loosely crossed, still performing, still composing herself into the picture of a reasonable woman. "You've been avoiding my calls," she said. Light, conversational, like we were discussing something mildly inconvenient. "Sit down, Vivienne." Something moved behind her eyes. She pulled out a kitchen chair and sat. I sat across from her with my hands flat on the table between us. No notebook, no phone, nothing. Just me and her and 38 years of history about to be burned to the ground. "I know about Aldous Verne Properties LLC, I said. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I watched it happen. Watched the warmth drain out of her face in real time, replaced by something carefully neutral, carefully controlled. She was good. I had to give her that. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. "That's Aldous's business entity," she said evenly. "He made a legitimate offer, and Dad agreed." "Vivienne." My voice was very quiet. "Ray Kowalski watched you guide Dad's hand across those papers. He was standing 10 feet away on the other side of that office window." The neutral expression held for exactly 3 more seconds. Then it cracked. Not dramatically. Vivienne wasn't the type for dramatic. It was subtler than that. A tightening around her jaw, a slight hardening of her eyes. The warmth didn't come back. Instead, something colder and truer moved into its place. The face she kept underneath the casserole dishes and the soft voice and the careful smiles. "Ray Kowalski," she said slowly, "is a 61-year-old mechanic who has been bitter about his position at that shop for years. Nobody is going to take his word over mine." "Adult Protective Services might," I said. "Especially combined with a notary who has worked with Aldous's LLC twice before. And especially combined with Dad's diagnosis date versus the sale date. And especially combined with a sale price that sits at less than half of current market value." Her jaw tightened further. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said. The gentleness was completely gone now. Her voice had an edge I had never heard from her before. Or maybe I had always heard it and told myself I was imagining it. "I have been here, Simone. Every single day, taking him to appointments, managing his medications, handling his finances, dealing with everything while you were living your comfortable little life in Nashville, and calling on Sundays like that was enough." "Don't," I said softly. "You don't get to waltz back in here after 4 years and decide you have opinions about how things were handled. You sold his shop to your boyfriend for $90,000, I said, while he sat in the corner not knowing what he was signing. That is not handling things. That is stealing from a sick old man who trusted you completely." The word stealing landed like a slap. I watched her absorb it. Then she stood up, straightened her jacket, picked up her purse from the back of the chair with deliberate, controlled movements. "You'll regret this," she said. "Maybe," I said, "but Dad won't." She walked out of that kitchen without another word. I heard the front door open and close. I sat at the table in the quiet and listened to Dad breathing steadily in the next room. My hands were still completely flat on the table, still perfectly steady. The legal process was not fast. I want to be honest about that because I think when we imagine justice, we imagine it arriving like a thunderclap, sudden, dramatic, complete. The reality was slower and quieter, and in some ways more satisfying for exactly that reason. Deanna filed the formal legal challenge to the sale within 2 weeks of my confrontation with Vivian. The grounds were clear: lack of mental capacity at time of signing, undue influence, conflict of interest, and a compromised notarization. Aldous Verne Properties LLC hired an attorney almost immediately, which told us they knew exactly how exposed they were. Adult Protective Services completed their investigation over 6 weeks. Their findings confirmed elder financial abuse. The case was referred to the Denton County District Attorney's Office. Vivienne called me twice during that period. The first call I let go to voicemail. She left a long, rambling message about family loyalty and how I was tearing everything apart over a misunderstanding. The second call I answered. She was quieter that time, more careful. She said she wanted to talk about resolving things privately. I told her there was nothing private left to resolve and ended the call. The sale was legally voided 4 months after Deanna filed. The court found that Gerald had lacked the legal capacity to enter into the contract at the time of signing. The guided signature, documented by Ray's testimony and supported by Dad's medical records, sealed it. Aldous Fern Properties LLC was ordered to return the deed. The $90,000 was clawed back and placed into a protected account managed by a court-appointed guardian to cover Dad's ongoing care. Vivienne was formally charged with elder financial abuse and fraud. She did not go to prison. Her attorney negotiated a plea that resulted in probation, community service, and permanent removal of any legal authority over Gerald's affairs. I know some people will read that and feel the punishment wasn't enough. Some days I feel that too. But I watched Vivienne's face in that courtroom when the judge read the terms, when her name was attached permanently to the words elder financial abuse in a public legal record. And something in me went quiet in a way that felt like enough. The shop itself, Gerald's garage, was assessed by a commercial real estate broker after the deed was returned. It was listed properly, at fair market value, and sold 8 months later for $215,000. Every cent went into Dad's care fund, managed independently, untouchable. Ray Kowalski was there the day the proper sale closed. He stood in that parking lot in his good jacket and watched the paperwork get signed by people who had no reason to deceive anyone, and when it was done, he looked at me and nodded once. The kind of nod that contains an entire conversation. Dad has good days and harder days. That is the nature of what he carries now, and there is no legal victory that changes it. But he is safe. He is cared for properly. His money is protecting him the way he spent 31 years protecting it for exactly this purpose. Some mornings I drive past where the shop used to be, and I can still smell the motor oil and the burnt coffee if I try hard enough. I let myself do that. I think you're allowed to grieve a place. What I know now, what this whole brutal year carved into me permanently, is that love that only shows up when there is something to gain is not love. It is strategy wearing love's clothing. My father built something honest with his bare hands. In the end, the truth turned out to be just as sturdy.